Let me tell you, a secret shame isn't a monster hiding under the bed. It's not lurking in the dark corners, waiting to jump out and destroy us. Shame lies much closer to home. It whispers in our ears when we're about to try something new, tells us we're not good enough when we fall short, and builds walls that keep us from showing up fully in our own lives. And yet, here's the paradox: shame doesn't grow louder when we ignore it, it grows quieter. But only when we listen. When we hear the word vulnerability, many of us instinctively associate it with weakness, exposure, or even failure. It's the uneasy feeling of putting ourselves out there without guarantees, of risking judgment, rejection, or disappointment. But what if I told you that vulnerability isn't a liability? What if it's the exact opposite, a source of strength, a catalyst for courage, and the key to unlocking the life we deeply desire? At its core, vulnerability is about showing up and being seen, even when there are no assurances of success or approval. It's the moment when you step onto the stage, knowing you might stumble, but choosing to stand tall anyway. It's admitting that you're struggling and asking for help, even when pride tells you to remain silent. It's daring to love, knowing heartbreak is a possibility, but believing connection is worth the risk. Vulnerability is not about weakness, it's about taking risks in the face of uncertainty. Courage and vulnerability are inseparable. Every courageous act requires stepping into the unknown, confronting fear, and embracing discomfort. Think about it: there is no bravery in playing it safe, no heroism in never taking chances. The most profound acts of courage throughout history have been rooted in vulnerability. From inventors risking ridicule to pursue their dreams, to activists standing up against oppression, despite the odds, their strength wasn't found in certainty, it was born in their willingness to take a leap of faith. Still, many of us resist vulnerability because it feels risky. Society often rewards perfectionism and invulnerability, equating them with competence and success. We're conditioned to believe that showing cracks in our armor will lead to judgment or rejection. And yet, hiding our vulnerability comes at a cost. It keeps us disconnected from others and from ourselves. It builds walls instead of bridges. When we embrace vulnerability, something extraordinary happens: we connect. People are not drawn to perfection, they are drawn to authenticity. When we let down our guard, we invite others to do the same. This is the foundation of trust, intimacy, and belonging. It's also where growth lives. Vulnerability pushes us to take risks, try new things, and grow beyond our comfort zones. This isn't to say vulnerability is easy. It can feel terrifying to expose our fears, flaws, or dreams. But it's also liberating. When we stop pretending to be invincible and allow ourselves to be seen for who we truly are, we free ourselves from the exhausting burden of perfection. We give ourselves permission to live authentically. Courage isn't about eliminating fear, it's about moving forward despite it. And the only way to do that is through vulnerability. So the next time you're faced with a choice between staying safe or stepping into the unknown, remember this: vulnerability is not a sign of weakness. It's the birthplace of your courage. The very act of showing up, just as you are, is the bravest thing you can do. Shame is a universal emotion, yet it's one of the hardest to talk about. It's that sinking feeling in your stomach when you believe you've fallen short, not just in what you've done, but in who you are. Unlike guilt, which is about our actions, I did something bad, shame cuts deeper. It tells us, I am bad, and when we're caught in the grip of shame, our instinct is often to hide, to keep it locked away in the shadows where no one can see. The problem is, shame thrives in secrecy. It grows in the dark, feeding on silence and isolation. The more we try to suppress it, the more it controls us. It tells us lies that we're alone in our struggles, that no one else feels this way, that if anyone knew, they'd think less of us. These stories keep us disconnected from others and from ourselves, locking us in a cycle of self-doubt and fear. But here's the truth: shame can't survive when it's brought into the light. The moment we name it, share it, and confront it, its power begins to diminish. This doesn't mean we have to stand on a stage and announce our deepest insecurities to the world. It simply means finding spaces where we can be honest about our experiences, whether that's with a trusted friend, a family member, a therapist, or even ourselves. Empathy is the antidote to shame. When someone listens to us without judgment, when they respond to our vulnerability with understanding instead of criticism, something extraordinary happens. We realize we're not alone. We see that our struggles don't make us unworthy, they make us human. Empathy says, I hear you, and I see you. You're not broken, you're brave for sharing this. The power of empathy doesn't just come from others, it starts with ourselves. Too often, we're our own harshest critics, quick to judge and slow to forgive. But what if we approached our shame with compassion instead of condemnation? What if, instead of berating ourselves for our perceived failures, we said, it's okay to feel this way. It's okay to be imperfect. You're doing your best, and that's enough. Confronting shame with empathy doesn't erase our mistakes or challenges, but it shifts how we see them. It allows us to take ownership of our stories without being defined by them. It reminds us that worthiness isn't conditional on perfection, it's a given. So the next time shame whispers in your ear, try something radical, listen to it, name it, and then respond with empathy. Whether it's reaching out to someone you trust or simply giving yourself grace, every act of compassion weakens shame's grip. Because when we confront shame instead of hiding from it, we reclaim our power. We step into the light, not as perfect beings, but as beautifully imperfect humans deserving of connection and love. We live in a world that often seems obsessed with perfection. Social media shows us curated glimpses of flawless lives, achievements are celebrated while struggles are hidden, and many of us grow up believing that to be accepted, we must look, act, or live a certain way. This relentless pursuit of perfection can feel like a never-ending treadmill, always striving but never arriving. And yet, despite all the effort we put into presenting ourselves as put together, something crucial often gets lost in the process: true connection. Connection, the feeling of being seen, heard, and understood, doesn't come from perfection. It comes from authenticity. When we strip away the masks and let others see our real selves, something profound happens. We create space for genuine relationships. The irony is that the very imperfections we try to hide are often the things that make us most relatable, most human, and most worthy of love. Think about the people you feel closest to in your life. Are they perfect, or are they the ones who have shared their struggles, admitted their mistakes, and let you see their vulnerable sides? These are the moments that build trust and intimacy. When someone says, I don't have it all figured out, but I'm trying, we connect not because they're flawless, but because they're real. The truth is, imperfection is not a weakness, it's a shared human experience. Every one of us has doubts, fears, and failures. When we pretend otherwise, we isolate ourselves, creating barriers that keep us from truly connecting with others. Embracing our imperfections isn't about airing every insecurity, it's about acknowledging that we don't have to be perfect to be loved or to belong. But why is it so hard to embrace imperfection? Often it's because we've internalized the belief that flaws make us unworthy. We fear judgment, rejection, or being seen as less than. And so we hide our struggles behind a facade of competence or confidence, thinking that if we can just hold it together, we'll be accepted. Yet this mindset does the opposite. It keeps us disconnected. When we embrace our imperfections, we're not just giving ourselves permission to be real, we're giving others permission too. Our vulnerability creates a ripple effect, encouraging those around us to let down their guard and show up as they are. In doing so, we foster an environment of mutual understanding and support, where everyone feels valued for who they are, not who they're pretending to be. Embracing imperfection doesn't mean settling for mediocrity or giving up on growth. It means recognizing that growth comes from a place of self-acceptance, not self-rejection. It means celebrating progress instead of fixating on perfection. It means showing up even when we feel unworthy and trusting that our real selves are enough. The beauty of connection lies not in impressing others, but in inviting them into the messy, imperfect, and wonderful reality of being human. When we embrace our imperfections, we unlock the true potential for connection, belonging, and love. In a world that often prioritizes appearances over authenticity, it's tempting to believe that connection depends on showing only the best parts of ourselves. We polish our public personas, hide our struggles, and present a version of ourselves that we think will be accepted. But true connection doesn't come from perfection. It comes from vulnerability, from letting others see us as we are messy, imperfect, and wonderfully human. Our imperfections are not weaknesses, they are the threads that make up the fabric of our shared humanity. Every one of us carries fears, insecurities, and moments of failure. Yet, so often we convince ourselves that these flaws must be hidden, as though they disqualify us from love or belonging. But the truth is, it's our imperfections that make us relatable and approachable. They remind others that they, too, don't have to be perfect to be worthy of connection. Think of the moments in your life when you felt closest to someone. Was it during a time of celebration when everything seemed perfect, or was it in moments of struggle when walls came down and you shared something real? Perhaps it was a friend admitting their fears, a family member confessing a mistake, or a colleague asking for help. These are the moments that build trust and intimacy not because someone appeared flawless, but because they dared to be authentic. When we embrace our imperfections, we're not just being honest with ourselves, we're extending an invitation to others. Our openness creates a safe space for them to share their own stories, fears, and flaws. In this shared vulnerability, connection thrives. There's a profound relief in knowing we're not alone, in realizing that others share our struggles and imperfections. Yet, embracing imperfection isn't always easy. Many of us carry a deep fear of rejection, convinced that if people see the real us, they'll turn away. This fear often stems from societal messages that equate worthiness with flawlessness. We're told to strive for perfection in our careers, relationships, and even appearances. But this relentless pursuit of perfection often leads to disconnection. When we hide behind a facade, we deny others the chance to truly know us, and we deny ourselves the chance to truly be known. Embracing imperfection doesn't mean ignoring our flaws or giving up on growth. It means approaching ourselves with compassion, understanding that mistakes are part of the journey. It means celebrating progress, however small, instead of fixating on an unattainable ideal. And it means showing up, even when we feel vulnerable, trusting that our worth isn't dependent on perfection. True connection is built when we allow ourselves to be seen, flaws and all. It's in those moments of authenticity that relationships deepen, trust grows, and love flourishes. When we embrace our imperfections, we not only free ourselves from the weight of perfectionism, but also create the space for meaningful, lasting connections with others. Shame is a powerful emotion. It speaks in whispers that echo loudly in our minds, telling us we are not enough. It distorts our view of ourselves, convincing us that our failures, mistakes, or perceived flaws define our worth. Shame thrives on these internalized narratives, weaving stories that undermine our confidence and isolate us from the connection we crave. But here's the transformative truth when we take the time to listen to shame. Instead of silencing it or running from it, we gain the power to rewrite those stories. Listening to shame doesn't mean letting it dictate our lives or giving it free rein over our self-worth. It means acknowledging its presence and understanding what it's trying to tell us. Shame often surfaces when we feel vulnerable, exposed, or disconnected. It points to the parts of ourselves that we fear others might reject or criticize. While this can be painful, it's also a valuable opportunity for self-reflection. When we lean into the discomfort and examine the roots of our shame, we can begin to challenge the stories it tells us. One of shame's most insidious tricks is convincing us that we're alone in our struggles. It says no one else has ever felt this way, or if people knew this about you, they'd reject you, but the reality is, shame is a universal human experience. Everyone has felt it, at one time or another. Listening to shame helps us recognize this shared humanity. It reminds us that we're not broken or unworthy, we're simply human. To rewrite the stories shame tells us, we must first bring them into the light. Shame feeds on secrecy and silence. It loses its power when spoken aloud. Naming our shame, whether by journaling, confiding in a trusted friend, or seeking support from a therapist, is an act of courage. It allows us to see shame for what it is, a set of stories, not the ultimate truth about who we are. Once we've named our shame, we can begin the work of rewriting those stories. This starts with separating our actions or experiences from our identity. Mistakes don't make us failures. Struggles don't make us weak. Imperfections don't make us unworthy. By challenging the narratives that shame has built, we can replace them with ones rooted in compassion and self-acceptance. Empathy is a powerful tool in this process. When we respond to shame with kindness, whether toward ourselves or others, we create space for healing and growth. Empathy says, I see your pain, but I also see your courage. You are more than this moment, this mistake, or this fear. Listening to shame isn't about dwelling on it. It's about understanding it, challenging it, and ultimately transforming it. It's about reclaiming the pen and rewriting the stories that shape how we see ourselves. In doing so, we move closer to a life defined not by fear or inadequacy, but by authenticity, resilience, and worthiness. Shame is a universal experience, but it does not have to define us. By choosing to face it head on, to listen rather than run, and to meet it with empathy and compassion, we reclaim the power it once held over our lives. When we name our shame, we bring it into the light, stripping it of the secrecy that allows it to grow. When we challenge the stories it tells us, we rewrite the narrative of our worth, moving from fear and inadequacy to self-acceptance and courage. The journey of confronting shame isn't easy, but it's transformative. It opens the door to deeper connection, authentic living, and a renewed sense of worthiness. It reminds us that we are not defined by our mistakes or imperfections, but by our ability to rise above them, to learn, and to grow. So let us listen to shame not to be consumed by it, but to understand it. Let us rewrite its stories with truth and kindness. And let us step forward, not as flawless beings, but as resilient, worthy, and beautifully human individuals. Because in the end, our courage to confront shame is what truly sets us free.